And if you don't mind sharing your screen as well there, so
I
we can get
sure
that
will.
going. See everyone's beautiful faces, but perfect. Cool.
Mm,
Ashley, where did you wanna?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out and attending our Black Advisor Business Council presentation that we have here, brought to you by CRESA, who's doing into today's topic, securing commercial real estate for your business and exploring careers. CRESA is also going to be talking about careers that they have available as well. As we know, we're in the market of COVID, and a little extra money can always do us some good. So I want to turn the mic over to Shelly and Sean. And also, wait a minute, I'm sorry. Shelly, are you doing the narration? Or?
Sean will do it, and then Rachel will as well.
Yep. Okay. And also Rachel, she will also be doing the presentation. So hope you guys enjoy. Also, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to just go ahead and put those questions in the chat. And also, I do want to also mention too that if you also like today's presentation, this will follow up by a survey. And we also have our Black Advisor Business Council meetings that occur every third Tuesday. So please come out and get involved there. But nevertheless, I further want to introduce CRESA.
Thanks, Ashley. Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us at 4 o'clock on a Tuesday when it's getting dark out, believe it or not. We connected with Ashley maybe 2 months ago and discussed giving a presentation about real estate, careers in real estate, and how to secure it for your business or in an investment capacity. So really happy to be here and present to y'all. Kelly, would you mind moving on to the next slide here?
I'm sorry, my screen is frozen. There we go. Okay.
Oh, no problem. So we've kind of broken it into two parts, and we'll get into it. And first, I thought I'd just mention we're going to try to get through the slide deck, in a efficient way. If you have any questions throughout, please post them to the chat feature. And between the three of us, we'll be fielding those and try to address them on each slide. But then, when we get to the end of this presentation, we'd like to just open it up and have an open conversation, which we can certainly have on each slide. We just felt if you're able to post them to the chat feature initially, it might be helpful. So quick overview, again, to reiterate, we'll go over commercial real estate overview, the properties, the careers, what CRESA does in particular, and then we'll go through a process of how to use business for use real estate for your business, how to invest, and some case studies as well. So let's move on here.
All right, I'll get started with the introductions. If you have a moment, maybe put in the chat your name and your business, and can sort of help us with our conversations as we go along, and for everyone in the room, quote unquote, to know who's here and from a networking perspective. But my name is Rachel Trice. I have been with CRESA for about, I hate to even say it, 14 years. I have been doing financial analysis for corporations. Is basically what I do, analyze transactions to make sure that they support the business and make financial sense for companies. That's my role in a nutshell. And Sean, Why don't you tell the people what you do?
Yeah, I've been with CRESA going on 6 years. So I don't have the resume Rachel does, but I joined probably about 6 months after I graduated college, and I've enjoyed it ever since. My focus is on account advisory, which includes brokerage and also the extended services we have with companies. So yeah, that's a quick summary, and we'll certainly dive a little bit more into those details further on. Shelley?
Hi, everybody. I'm Shelley, and I work in operations. So I do all the non-broker stuff in our office, and I've been here almost 4 years now. So I've really enjoyed it. We've got a great group of people. There's only 9 of us in this office, so kind of a small group right now, but we're looking to grow. So that's where we're at right now.
Oh, and I should mention, I'm actually out of the Denver office of CRESA. So we have offices all over the nation, and we collaborate a lot.
Do. And Zoom has certainly helped accomplish that, I should say.
Mhm.
All right, great. Well, let's kick it off here. So commercial real estate overview. Let's move on to the next one. So a quick summary. Obviously, the real estate industry is very large in this country. When it as it relates to commercial real estate, it accounts for 13% of GDP and aggregate value of 16 trillion. And just throwing those stats up there because you consider all of that, and yet so often, and before I got into the industry even, I didn't really pay attention to commercial real estate and all of the jobs and roles and components that are related to it. And it's pretty vast. And our goal is to try to at least touch on some of that and educate you guys a little bit today. And we will certainly do our best job. Let's move on here to the next one. So a quick overview of the variety of careers, roles, places you can get into commercial real estate. And we thought we'd kind of start that off with the development construction side of things, which some of this may seem obvious, but some may not be unknown. But if you look at any building, it starts from a land site, turns into a building, turns into it can be sold, it can be improved. There's lots of special improvements that go on in a number of these commercial projects. And throughout that entire process, there are a lot of roles that go into it. And here's some high level between the general contractor, subcontractor, which can include everything from your standard electrician, plumber, painting, utilities, but also, and we've seen this as well, being a sub for example, if you're an artist and you're to connect with an architect or design team, you could establish that relationship and be a resource every time a company moves offices. And that's just an example. And that goes on and on. If you're a food vendor, for instance, with the new protocols with COVID, we know a lot of office users have been reluctant to go out and shop for lunch, and a lot more of them are actually getting food brought in for the entire office on a weekly basis for lunch. So if you're a food vendor, there's a plug. There's so many ways to navigate into this industry. And as we go down, asset management is a standard component. The landlord, building owner, there's property management involved in that, lots of finance involved in that, and Rachel can touch on some of that. And then brokerage, which is more of my role. We tend to segment it out by kind of 3 core broker roles, which is being a sale or purchase agent for buildings, being the listing agent for buildings for lease, and then being a tenant agent, representing tenants who are going into those buildings for lease. And lastly, we wanted to touch on corporate real estate, which generally when you make that reference, it means roles that are in a company. For instance, I took a look at posted roles for Nike in their corporate real estate department the other day, and I believe they had 27 openings. And you think, what are they doing? Well, what they're doing is they're helping them plan for the future, for growth expectations, workplace strategy, implementing new COVID protocols when people come back to the office, which they're scheduled to in January. They're helping them build, they're helping them secure furniture, and I could go on, and I don't want to bore you, but there's a lot of roles there that go into these large companies, you know, and CRESA is essentially a supplement to that. That is our core business and our service lines. We help companies navigate the world of real estate and how it benefits them.
It's almost
Rachel,
it's almost like if you think corporate real estate, you know, companies need all the other services that are listed above, right, to deal with their own real estate portfolio. And so they contract out to these individual companies that have these services so that they can best service their own portfolio and not take away from their own business, right? Because a lot of times the companies we support are not focused on real estate, they're focused on their actual business, and they need to continue to do that. So if you think about it, you could go in the corporate real estate route, or you can go into the actual real estate company to do development, asset management, and brokerage. So it's an interesting two-route way to get into it.
Yeah. Thanks, Rachel. All right, let's move on to the next one here. So this is a bit self-explanatory, and you know, again, I'll reiterate that we will share this slide deck after the fact, just so you know everyone can see everything. Can you go back?
Go back.
They're showing. Yeah. So, but I just wanted to touch on a few things here. So, you know, there's a wide variety of buildings in this industry. There's some key ones, and I would say those first three listed is really the area that CRESA operates in, which is office, flex use, and industrial. You know, office is, I think, generally an understood product. It is usually a multi-tenant building. It's pretty rare for a single tenant to occupy an entire office building, but it happens. Flex is a unique combination of office and industrial, but it also, you know, it takes some components from office, where you're going to have a built-out office with the correct air filtration to accommodate a lot of people sitting in the office or working in the office, but then also adds in some of the power requirements that you might see in an industrial building. You know, a lot of lab space, medical lab space, or tech lab space is used in these buildings. And then industrial is your standard warehouse, your manufacturing. And then retail is a wild animal unto itself. It covers so many different areas. You know, the majority of business use that you think of is going to be occupying retail. And as you look through the types of uses, we've put Amazon down at the bottom just so as an example. I mean, Amazon has offices where people, you know, services working. They use flex for manufacturing, and for light distribution, they have, you know, large scale industrial buildings. And then they've also opened retail buildings. You know, who knows what else they'll open, but and then further, there's a lot of other special purpose type of commercial properties in the industry. Again, we would be happy to answer any questions as it relates to this, but we'll move on for now, and we'll probably reference some of these product types later on. So a quick summary of you know, roles as it relates to a property and occupier, as this is stated. This, again, some of this is elementary and you understand it, but we wanted to kind of break it out as such, so we could give you, you know, context for how most properties are operated, but also some more context for what CRESA does in particular. You know, for any given property, you're going to have the owner, landlord, who can be an individual, a group of individuals, a real estate investment trust, which is the REIT, or it can be a business. You know, if you are a investment-oriented landlord, you're going to need to lease the space. So you'll likely hire a leasing agent to market the space, you know, create strategy to get it leased up on a long-term basis. You also need property manager to handle, you know, a variety of things, including maintenance, handling the operating expenses, paying property taxes, repairs, keeping the building up to code. You unlike your residential house, a commercial property is going to have a lot of components that require it to be up to code. For instance, if there's a code change in ADA requirements, a building is going to have to change those, and you're going to, as the owner, be responsible for that. And we'll move down to occupier because the majority of buildings are a landlord, investor, and tenant structured scenario. So a tenant is going to be any person, organization, business, leasing naturally. A tenant advisor, which is across the table per se from the leasing agent, and that is our specialty, is being an exclusive tenant advisor. It helps companies manage their a wide variety of things with their space, whether leasing the space, the transaction, but also the improvement projects in the space. And then a tenant is going to have the support which we provide, but also as we described in as it relates to corporate real estate, there's a lot of roles that go into supporting a company as it occupies space. And lastly, we wanted to just put this down here at the bottom to point out that there are owner occupiers, whereas a business operates out of a space and owns the space, but it is pretty rare, as you'll see on this next slide.
Hey, Sean,
Kelly, if you don't mind.
we've got a
Yeah.
question here from Calvin Davis.
Okay.
Calvin, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yes, can you hear me? Sorry.
Yes. Mhm.
Okay,
Yeah.
so all it was just based on my last comment that I left about so basically what I'm doing right now is looking to acquire, properties that need like more fixer upper, even though they are commercial and stuff, because my plan is to basically help underserved and smaller sole proprietors and small businesses acquire short-term leases and not be stuck in
Mhm.
such a because just with the business being how it is, it's not guaranteed that every business has a 5-year scale plan,
Mhm.
and it might only be good for that moment. So my idea was to implement more of a shorter term possibilities and more, like he was saying, flex ideas, and I'm developing a very like a stronger business plan with that. So my question was it was just more so like I'm the way that I'm looking to acquire the property is going through the first time home buyers program, and through
Okay.
that first time purchase, after 6 months or so, I'd have some equity developed, and I was going to use that equity to put down on to kind of get started in the journey. So that's what my question originally is that something that is a smart possibility, or is that something you want to do like last resort?
Yeah, I mean, I love the plan, the idea. So there's a couple of things, and I do not intend to play devil's advocate. I think it's important to address any of the challenges that you may address up front. So looks like you'd be doing your first home buyer's loan for a residential house. If you then created an entity to purchase commercial assets, you would very likely be able to secure SBA funding, which helps some of the loan to purchase commercial asset upfront. And here's where the problem is in the commercial industry, because the majority of buildings have some sort of loan structure, and those loan structures are essentially dictated by the bank that provides it. And what those banks are looking for are long-term leases. And that's, again, I'll reiterate, we are an exclusive tenant advisor. I mean, our one of the number one things we are always negotiating is the term length. We want to push it down, we want to bring it down, but it's just this, a back and forth. So the reality is I would love to support more short-term leases. It's just challenging when you have debt on the property to be able to do that. Does that make sense? It's a bit confusing. Now that said, it's doable, and I think it's more doable with private investors than with the bank.
Okay.
And I think there's a route to do it. and certainly to tell the story and to sell the reason behind doing it to support these small businesses. In fact, another thing you could even consider is that, in supporting these small businesses, you actually get them and give them an opportunity to invest in those commercial assets themselves. It might be a small chunk, 5% per se, but that's another route. And I think it's something that I would love to get into, and I would be happy to chat with you,
Okay.
more outside of this to talk about it. But there are certainly challenges, but I think, hey, let's address the challenges and try to get over that and figure out how something like that could be structured and work.
Okay.
It sounds similar to a co-working situation, but more individual building based.
Yes,
that-
because
yeah.
I see that there's a lot of underserved buildings, just in general, that could use a revamp and some repurpose,
Mhm.
and I've noticed that especially in, the greater Portland area, where like a lot of these businesses just are boarded up, and the opportunity would present itself to have a lot, because there's a lot of people who are working from home, but then wouldn't mind having that flex space, or wouldn't mind having that, their own comforted, I guess, office space, makeshift space, and let it serve its purpose, for as long as the job is available, and not put them, as well as like somebody like my fiance, who's a spa owner, and it's an up and down industry. It's guaranteed, that you will have some clientele throughout the day, but the scaling portion, it's kind of just a run of the mill kind of, situation, depending on vendors, depending on products, depending on, so many moving parts, that 5 years into one lease and expecting that person to have 100% consistency with their brand, with their, and still be able to pay it every month is,
Mhm.
in this atmosphere, this climate, business climate, it's just it's a little unreasonable, to be honest. So that was my goal, I guess, ultimately, is just to be able to
Yeah.
offer, a
Yeah,
little
and
bit
stay
more
tuned, because we're going to go over an example of a company that's started from the basement in the house
Okay.
and went through similar story. So
Wow.
I think
Okay.
you'll find that interesting.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Thanks, Calvin. Thanks for the question and discussion. That was very, very beneficial.
Thank you.
So moving on to this slide, and as it relates to the last one, just to give you some context. So we just did some research on all commercial buildings in the Hillsborough and Beaverton area. Well, all commercial buildings that are office, flex, industrial, retail, medical, which makes up the majority of commercial properties. You still have hotels, you still have sports centers, etc. But this is the core of it. And between Hillsborough and Beaverton, you have here about 72 million square feet over almost 3,000 buildings. And of that 72 million, you have nearly 50 million square feet leased space. So the landlord-tenant structure. You have about 10.5 million owner-occupier, and then 12 million square feet of that is Nike and Intel, which are generally owner-occupier. And this is, it's a unique statistic, but it is helpful, and you're going to see something similar. In fact, relative to most other markets, this is actually high because of Nike and Intel. Most other markets, you're going to have close to 75-80% of the product is leased, and there are a number of reasons for that, which we will get into. But at a high level, it really comes down to using capital to purchase an asset versus using capital to invest in your business, the actual business that you operate. And this is an area that Rachel does a lot of analyses in. If there's anything, Rachel, you wanted to share on this, I know we'll be getting into it more later on. But...
Yeah, we'll definitely get into it. But this is a conversation that companies, businesses have constantly: is should we be leasing? Should we be buying? And as he mentioned, capital is more often than not a big reason why you would or would not, as well as how you're using the space, right? If you have very intense capital needs to set up your space and you don't want to move that, or it's too costly to move, then you don't want to spend the money on leases. You want to buy the space. But we'll get into more details on that.
All right. So we wanted to jump into kind of the folks at CRESA for a couple slides. I know there's a lot here on this page. You know, you can look at it when we share the slide deck as well, but kind of at high level, as we discussed previously, from a corporate real estate perspective and how we support them is through transaction management, which is brokerage, you know, which is representing tenants leasing space, representing tenant, you know, companies purchasing space and selling at times. And then, you know, as part of that, we support companies through workplace solutions, which is managing, you know, managing how the workplace operates, managing how they lay out their desks, how they have, you know, where they put conference rooms, where they have meeting rooms. And the same goes to industrial, being creative about how an industrial company is going to have racking, et cetera. And I would say that over the course of the last you know, 2 years now, with COVID, our workplace solutions team really got a lot of work because, you know, what companies are trying to do was figure out how can we have a remote structure? How can we have people in the office 2-3 days a week, but not have desks empty, which we refer to as hoteling, desk hoteling. And how can we make sure that our office space is sanitary so people feel safe coming in? And that also ties into, as you can see, the second to last service line technology, which, you know, helps companies operate in a remote capacity. And I would say that, you know, maybe some of you folks have experienced this, but there are a number of office users. You can think of, say, insurance, or a law firm, or really anyone who has secure data. The problem when their employees go and begin working from their home internet off their Wi-Fi is that they're suddenly liable to attacks, right? In every office space, you're going to have a secure data center, essentially, that you run your cloud storage off of. This is getting into the details, but the point being that there are, you know, a lot of components to being able to work remote versus not, and as part of CRESA, we want to try to support all of that. So, you know, if you have questions on any of these other service lines, we'll be happy to answer them, but don't want to go into too much detail on them all. So, so this is an important slide to us. You know, when I joined CRESA, I came over from actually CBRE, believe it or not. And it was at a time when CRESA was growing rapidly around the country. We're now at about 60 offices. But it was, conceptually what we were presenting was a platform where we do not represent landlords or developers. And that's nothing against landlord or developers. There's a product, there's a tenant, and that's how it works. But I think the point with our platform is that there is an inherent conflict of interest in the industry when a commercial real estate firm is representing the landlord and also representing the tenant. Traditionally, the model might be, I'm a broker, I'm a middleman, and I want to be able to get a deal done. But the reality is that there's always more interest on one side or the other. So we wanted to avoid that. To just give you an example, if you're buying a house, for instance, and you have, a broker show you 10 properties, say 5 of which someone at their office or they themselves actually represent, it's hard to weed through the details and understand who is, who that broker is really representing, if that makes sense. You see, if that person is representing a seller who is going to then go buy another house and they have an opportunity to represent them buying another house, their interest is now more heavily weighed with them than with you. And it's a challenge that people, I think, fail to see at times. But when it comes to commercial space, it's exponentially worse because you have an office building, say, that has the 20-story office building and every floor is cut in half. So you have 40 spaces in the building and you're one tenant going into that property, and say one of these large firms that represents the landlord is representing you represent 1/40th of the interest of that broker and that landlord. So to think that that your best interest is being taken into account, it's hard to. And this is not to knock these other firms. There are some great tenant rep teams in these other firms. When it comes to CRESA, the idea was really, we are going to avoid any opportunity even to create a conflict by not representing landlords and solely representing tenants. So that's a quick summary of what our platform is kind of based off of, and this graphic kind of represents that. Again, if you have any questions on there, we're happy to answer. So lastly, we wanted to just point out the variety of careers we have at CRESA. Please reach out to Shelly after this with any questions, whether it relates to careers at CRESA, questions for Rachel or I, or really anything else. And we want to be able to be a resource, point you in the right direction, or help you if we're able to. But yeah, I mean, in summary, we have a lot of careers, as that service line graphic indicated. The advisor role, which is something that I have, is our primary, the primary role here at CRESA, which is representing tenants, representing companies with transactions, but also being able to tie in the variety of services that we have, which include project management, which is if you're building a building, if you have improvements to a building, if you need to buy furniture, if you need to do anything along those lines, our project management team can help you and solely represents you in securing that. For example, if you're a large office user and you need to and you want to purchase furniture, it's wise to go out to say 2 or 3 or even 4 furniture vendors to really get an accurate layout of what the cost might be. And the intention is that, again, that's how we would be representing you in that process. And further, we have a very great marketing team, which Shelly is part of. She's also part of operations, HR, and administration. She does a lot for us, I can tell you that much.
The other thing I'd mention,
there are a
Sean,
lot. Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
The other thing I'd mention is
Rachel,
we have a lot of clients where we have to place full-time employees at their sites to manage the properties. So that's another way that we work with clients. And so if we have those sorts of opportunities, we would be more than happy to direct people that way as well.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. That's a great point. And we also, we work with a lot of businesses who tell us that they're hiring all the time, and so that's another way to make a recommendation. So again, if you guys have any other questions on this, please reach out to Shelly. Any of us would be happy to talk to you. So let's get into the fun stuff, the case studies and how to go about looking at real estate. Hopefully that summary did not bore you guys too much. So commercial real estate for your business. So here's a kind of a simple map that we like to use when it comes to the real estate process. Whether you're considering investing in real estate, whether you're looking to buy for your business, whether you're looking to lease for your business, we always want to start with strategic planning. And that's kind of the header that we call it. But at the end of the day, what this is asking a lot of questions. It's understanding what type of real estate you need. Do you need real estate? Can you go without it? And if you're investing, what's a good area to invest in? And for example, I can tell you, investing in office space right now is probably not the best area to put your money, because there's a lot of uncertainty in that market. Industrial, on the other hand, is extremely hot market. It's a very good long-term investment. So from an investment standpoint, there's a lot of avenues to look at. From a business standpoint, if you run a business, whether you're a restaurant, whether you're a consultant, if you manufacture products, if you distribute products, there's a lot of these questions to ask to understand a location, to understand the type of real estate you might look at, understand the cost, understand your budget. And we want to do that as much of that as possible before we get into the next 2 phases, which is the transaction management and project management phase, because too often we come across we dive right into the transaction management phase, i.e., someone has identified a building and they want to begin negotiating to buy or lease that building. And as we go through that, we realize, oh, this building needs XYZ improvements. The bathrooms need to be brought up to ADA code. The electrical is not properly wired and that needs to be changed. Suddenly, you're coming out of pocket a lot to get this building to a state that you can even occupy it. So trying to address some of those issues up front is really critical. So that's high level. Again, questions that you can refer to later on. And let's move on to this case study that's, we think is a really cool example. A group that we've known for some time, since 2004. Well, I haven't. I was in high school. But some folks in our team has. The Nosa Familia, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar or have seen this logo before. They're a great coffee roaster here in Portland. And this is just a bit of a timeline of their growth and how they're able to work through some of the challenges that are related to their real estate, the cost of their real estate, and how that impacted their business. And Calvin pointed out a very good point. When you're growing business, when you're uncertain of your future sales, when you're uncertain of your future revenue, how can you possibly sign a 5-year lease? It's extremely challenging. So there are a lot of options. There's not enough. So hopefully, Calvin, you get your project off the ground, because the more flexible options that are created for companies, the better. The better for everyone. But so Nosa was Augusto, who is the owner, started in his house. I think he says it's about 100 square feet. He had a small basement where he would store stuff. He had an attic that he used as an office, and his lab was his kitchen. And it took a couple years to get off the ground, but they finally felt comfortable enough to move into a space which they leased. And they leased for the reasons that we've kind of talked about already, because it really, at that stage in his business, it didn't make sense to buy anything, given that he didn't know his projected growth, but he certainly was on a path to continue growing. So he was able to secure a small 800 square foot space that was, I think, a flexible lease term at the time, and slowly expanded in that property to about 1,500 square feet. And by 2011, they really needed to move and secure more space. And in 2011, they looked at the market, and they looked at the lease versus purchase analysis, and ended up choosing to lease, because again, they were not sure what their continued growth would be, and they weren't sure if they would need that type of space for a long term. So they signed a 3-year lease at the time in 6,000 square feet, and they were luckily had a business partner actually who was able to then sublease about 1,500 square feet from them. So it was a bit intimidating at the time, going from $1,500 per month in rent to $4,500 per month in rent, as you can see here. But it was something that they felt they needed to do for their business. And also keep in mind that the improvements to the space, that just to get it up and running to become a roastery, were upwards of $50,000, and that's after they were able to secure a small allowance from the landlord. So they stayed in the space for about 6 years. It was supplemented again with a subtenant, and finally they got to a point where they realized they needed to get another space, and they at this point wanted to look at something to purchase, because they felt that they'd gotten to a point where they would have steady growth for a number of years. So they went into the market looking at a range of properties. I believe it was between 10 and 20,000 square feet. A lot of deals fell through. A lot of those, the reason for a lot of those deals falling through were because of what I pointed out on the earlier slide, where the cost of improvements to the space just to operate out of it became too much. Even if the building was, say, $1.5 or $2 million, which is a lot of money, their improvements added another $500,000 or sometimes more, and it was just cost prohibitive. And many times you don't find out about those things until you're pretty close to negotiating just the transaction itself. They were getting increasingly frustrated, and they also were getting, to a point where they didn't think they'd be able to allocate, upwards of $2 million to a property and tie themselves up in that debt because they wanted to put that towards their business. So they ended up finding a 26,000 square foot building, which is, again, more space than they needed. But what we did was get an investment partner who partnered with Gusto, the owner, and created a separate entity to help supplement purchasing this building. And then Gusto leased NOSA back to himself, essentially, this separate entity, and occupied 16,000 square feet of the 26,000 square foot building. And they were able to get another tenant to lease 10,000 square feet. And that made it financially reasonable. It was complicated, but at the end of the day, what it was relationships. This investor, I think he asked to meet with Gusto like 5 or 6 times. They got coffee, presumably, maybe they got drinks, but just to get an understanding and build a relationship. And that was really what it was, to say, okay, I trust that this is going to be a business that's going to sustain. But, at the end of the day, I think the struggle there was, A, we need space, and B, are we going to tie up our capital by paying rent for a long time? Are we going to just continue paying rent and not putting it into an asset? Or are we going to tie up our capital, put it into an asset that we expect we're going to grow into, but then suddenly we don't have capital to continue growing? You see, like, it's, there's 2 scales and you have to constantly weigh them. So this was a really, really good structure because the investor benefited and was able to put up that upfront capital for, to purchase the building and to handle the improvements. And NOSA was able to operate out of the building and be a part owner. And, again, it's rare, but it's doable. It is really doable, but it takes time to get, you can see here, that's a 13-year period until they got to that point. And not to say that it's going to take 13 years, it could take, just a couple of years. But I think the key here is growth projections. The key here is understanding and being confident in how much you're going to grow, because buying a building and outgrowing it is going to be really challenging. Buying a building and something such as COVID happening again, say it's an office building and you are no longer operating out of it, and you suddenly have a very difficult time selling that office building because the office space is not very hot, is also very challenging. So there's a lot to consider here. So now NOSA in 2001 has this roastery, which they're a part owner, and they've also opened 3 retail spots, which I believe there's some pictures down here. But it's just a really cool story of a small business, and some of the ups and downs and how they were able to navigate using space for their business and what they did to be successful through that process. So if you have any questions on this.
There is a question here from Les, and he says, are there lease to own options available?
Oh, yeah. That's something that we usually recommend putting into your lease. If you are the majority occupier of a building, if you occupy more than 50% of the building, we would always recommend having an option or a right to purchase. It can be tricky, the language as it relates to that, but it is something to put in there, and it's certainly well worth doing, because it gives you flexibility to secure the space. And also, one of the biggest benefits here, and this is getting a bit into the details, but if you're looking at a space that requires a lot of improvements, a lot of upfront capital to do the improvements, you can either ask the landlord to pay for those, but then your rent's going to get higher, or you can have lower rent, pay for them yourselves. And if you do that, then having an option to purchase later on is extremely valuable, because you have put money into the building, right? You have put, there's something permanent to that building that you've contributed to, and having a right to buy it is, aside from peace of mind, it's a logical business decision. So I'm going to hand it off. Rachel, are you back on? It looked like,
Oh my gosh, yes. I just got the blue screen, which was
oh
very
no.
scary.
Well, perfect timing, because now we want an expert to talk to us about lease versus purchase example.
Yes.
And I'm going to let Rachel kick it off. This is a live example that's currently listed for sale in the Beaverton market, and we want to just use that as an example. But Rachel,
Yeah.
take it away.
So this is, and I'm going to keep it a very high level example of how you'd look at, the lease versus purchase decision. There are some nuances that I'll talk about, but we're not put into the numbers. So essentially, we're looking at a retail space. You can see the picture there with the mattress firm and some other tenant in there. Based on just the information I saw from this building, it looks like there potentially may be available space for rent in the building, right? But for now, we're just going to
Yes.
consider the whole building. Let's just say we're buying it empty, right? We're gonna decide whether we lease or buy 12,000 square feet. So if you look at the numbers, right, the rent for that space is $18 a square foot, which is about $18,000 a month. Operating expenses, taxes, etc., $10,000. So you're looking at a total, payment of $28,000 per month. And then, we're assuming it's a blank space. Whatever type of business you are, you're going to need to fix it up however, so this is, obviously a very broad strokes assumption of $50 that you'd need for $50 a square foot to improve the space to fit your requirements, right? So you're going to spend $602. Now, in this case, we're saying, that the $18 has an allowance from the landlord baked into it, right? So they're going to give us $50 a square foot to improve our space. But what they've done is they've taken that $50 a square foot and baked it into your rental rate. So if they weren't giving you $50, that rental rate potentially could be, call it $16 a square foot per year. So just as you're thinking through from the owner's perspective, when you're leasing, just remember that when you're getting monies to improve your space, you're actually paying for it. It's just quote unquote, in the rent. And so in this case, for the lease, you won't have to come up with any upfront capital, right? You'll be able to move into the space, have the work done to the space, and just pay rent and operating expenses. Okay, what about if I decided to purchase this thing? Now, for now, I'm just going to use their purchase price of $278 a square foot. In reality, if it was empty, it would be closer to, call it 150, maybe 200 a square foot, because the value really is increased if there's a tenant in the space already. So if you're purchasing this space, you would obviously pay for operating expenses, taxes for the entire space, but then you have to buy it, right? So you're spending $3.3 million to buy it, and then you have to improve the space an additional 50 a square foot. So you'll end up with like a 3.9 number that you need to come up with to buy this building in order to lower your operating costs. There are options. Obviously, you can finance it with the bank if you have access to capital that way, or you can, find investors, as Sean mentioned, in the NOSA example. But as you compare these two, you can see if your focus is low operating costs, right? As a business, purchasing looks great, right? Because you're only paying $10,000 a month on this space. But then the 3.9 becomes a barrier to entry almost, unless you can finance it, which then the debt will increase your recurring costs, right? But it's likely that it won't increase it to the extent of a lease, right? Your recurring costs will still be a lot lower. So that's sort of how we like to think through from a numbers perspective. You have to look at the whole picture. And the way we typically do it is look at the present value of all the costs, right, of each scenario. We pick a finite period and then compare the costs of the two and see which one, factoring in the timing of capital expenditures, the timing of annual, monthly payments, and then figure out which one is more expensive than the other. Now, from the leasing perspective, yeah, you can have some flexibility, right? You can sign a shorter term lease, but once that lease term is over, right, you have exposure now to rental rates. They could be a lot higher, they could be a lot lower. You just don't know. So you're almost, it's a risk to do the lease as well. For the purchase, you have to factor in things like, oh, the roof went. That's my responsibility because I own the building. I need to maintain the air, HVAC. That's another, big capital cost item that might come up. So those are things that you have to budget for as an owner. And even as an investor, when you think about buying commercial real estate, you have to factor in any big capital costs that might come up along the way. The other thing to think about this scenario, right? So if you buy it as an owner, let's say you occupy the portion of the building that's empty, and there's already a tenant in the other side of the building, right? So now you have an income stream coming in, and it could cover the costs of the space that you're occupying. So that might be a good way to lower your burden of occupancy in an owned property, right? You still have to buy it and improve it. So access to capital is still a thing that you have to have, but having another tenant in there could support your occupancy as a business owner. The other thing to think about as an investor, right? Let's say you buy this thing with you have two tenants in there. You spend the money to fill it up, right? You have to pay broker commissions if you are dealing with a broker. You have to pay to improve the space for whatever tenants are coming in. The other thing you have to think about is what happens when Mattress Firm leaves. Now, how long is it going to take you to re-tenant that space? Could be 6 months, could be 12 months, and you are going to have to cover the costs of that empty space while you find a tenant. And so these are things to keep in mind. It sounds like a good investment, but there are a lot of moving parts that could make it very, very expensive. But I've seen it work. I worked with credit union that occupied a tail end of retail, just like this. There was a branch at the end and then 2 retail spaces. And they got, FedEx in there and a chiropractor in the space. And it worked beautifully because they were paying retail rents, which are typically higher than the office rents. And someone like a FedEx, I tell you, they're very stable. They signed 15-year leases, and they pay their rent on time, and they don't cause ruffles. They don't, do too much. It's beautiful. So if you can get into that scenario, right, the investment's beautiful. It pays for itself, and you just have to maintain the structure itself and make sure that your tenants are happy. But that's sort of what you have to think about as you get into, oh, should I lease? Should I own property? Let's see the next slide. So, and some of this stuff I've mentioned, things to keep in mind, debt. We talked about, if you don't have 3.9 million sitting around, you can finance it. And this is a way also for companies and businesses not to tie cash into real estate, right? You'd rather put the money into your business, so why not use a mortgage instead? So that's just something to think about. But as we discussed, it increases your run rate in terms of costs, cash costs. Again, we mentioned owner occupiers. You can minimize your costs by leasing any excess space. That's another way to manage, flexibility that is, when you think of owning a property, that's it, right? If you need to get bigger, you have to start thinking about it's a very static thing, right? I'm actually dealing with a client right now who owns a property and they are bursting at the seams. So do we go lease somewhere else? Do we go buy another property? Do we sell this and, buy another large property? You can cover the having excess space issue in owning a building, right? By leasing it out to third parties, like you saw Noosa did, they were able to cover their costs. The expansion thing is the only issue, right? If you don't have any excess land to build on, if you need certain parking requirements, those are things that may come into issue when you're trying to expand in the ownership scenario. The other thing to think about, leasing, while it provides you flexibility, you have the exposure, right, to rental rate fluctuations. When your lease term's over, the rates can go wherever the landlord pleases, particularly if you have large investments in the property, right? Take a really static situation. If you have a government tenant with a SCIF, which is a secure data room, those things are impossible to move. It takes 2 years, and the landlords know this. And they had a lease, unfortunately, and so they were stuck, right? Whatever the landlord wants to charge you for rent, you don't really have leverage because they know you can't move that equipment. But from the ownership perspective, you just have to be prepared for large capital expenditures, right? Repairs to the building. You have to anticipate those. You have to maintain the building too, I have to say. We managed a property for a tenant and they neglected that building for many, many years. And so when we came into the scene, they had to spend a lot of money and they were really not happy about it. But because they had so much deferred maintenance, there were so many issues. And you don't want to pile more money into an asset that you want to make money for you. So just maintain it while it's cheap, if you will. I'll go through these other things quickly. Your exit strategy is key. If you're thinking about buying real estate, even when you lease, if you improve the space so specifically for your needs, just know that if you own it, you're limiting your buyer pool, right? When you want to sell it, because they're just seeing this asset. Oh my God, I got to move this. I got to change this. I got to build out that. They're just seeing dollar signs. And so they, move on to the next property or they slash the price. So always keep your exit in mind, even as you lease. If you do a lot of stuff to a lease, you'll probably have restoration costs, right? The landlord doesn't want to deal with it. So they'll make you return it to originals the way it was at the end of the lease. And that's more money that you'll have to spend at the end. And timing, if you're in the market to expand and you think buying might be a thing, maybe you need to make sure you have the time to contemplate and find the right building. The market, it's easier, I would say, correct me if I'm wrong, Sean, it's easier to find a lease than it is to find a building to buy that meets your requirements and you don't have to throw money at. So timing is a big deal. And if you are in a situation where you have funds to build a building, set aside 2 years, because it's a process. It's a very long process.
Yeah. Unless you're in Texas, then 6 to 9 months.
What?
Rachel, thank you so much. I know that's a lot of information. And again, that's I guess to boil it down, that's kind of what we focus on is trying to weed through all of the details, all the hurdles that come up when you're looking at this from a high level. And I think, you know, Rachel really pointed on exit strategy, because it's really critical. Whether you're leasing, whether you're owning, it's always about, you know, what's going to happen next. You know, if you're leasing and, you know, you sign a 3-year term, what's going to happen in 3 years? You know, same if you sign a 5-year term, what's going to happen in 5 years? What's going to happen in a year? You know, it's you know, it's a constant thing, and it's not. I would say to avoid looking at commercial real estate as you might look at residential real estate, even if you're looking at residential real estate in an investment capacity. They're two very different animals. You know, and the last thing I wanted to point out on that, you know, a debt structure when you're buying a building, you know, there's first home buyer loans where you can secure very low down payments. You know, I think I've seen as low as 3% and lower even. When it's a commercial asset, it's, you know, you're generally looking at around 20% down. Now, what, you know, there are additional debt structures you can secure to offset that, but it's not quite as simple as what you might look at with a residential structure. And lastly, you know, as you said, again, having a tenant like FedEx or having a tenant like Starbucks in your building is going to help you immensely. There's no doubt about that. And you know, so, you know, initiating the planning process, as we spoke about, the first thing, initiating the planning process, trying to understand what buying looks like, what leasing looks like, what you need to have for the next couple of years is the best thing you can do. And once you've done that, you can go out and actively pursue options. If you flip it, if you actively pursue options left and right and just seeing stuff and then try to figure all that stuff out later, it's really challenging. So we'd like to open it up to just a conversation, questions. You know, I'm seeing a couple here come through.
Yeah, a website to see properties listed other than LoopNet. We use CoStar.
That's,
I don't know that
yeah,
it's accessible. It's pretty expensive, I would say.
Yeah, it's only
that's,
very expensive.
Yeah.
yeah, and CoStar actually owns LoopNet, and you know, LoopNet is a service that, well, to be frank, I mean, what I've found is there are a lot of expired listings on there, and you end up calling whoever has listed it, whether it's a broker or a landlord, you know, and it's no longer available, but they'd like to steer you to something else. So be mindful of that when you are looking through LoopNet. That said, looking through LoopNet to understand the market, right, how things are listed, what the prices are on them, is actually a pretty helpful exercise. But unlike, you know, the vast residential market, all the listing sites you can see on in residential, commercial, you know, still challenging to really be up to date with the most current availabilities and listings. You know, CoStar is very, very expensive, and you know, as a business, we have to have it. But it's you know, that's the number one resource we can use to identify commercial space. You know, I know you can go to Craigslist. You can also go to you know, you can go to the city website and look at, you know, all land data is public record, so you can see who the ownership is, and it doesn't hurt to just give someone a call if you found a spot and you said, hey, that really looks nice. It seems like a crazy thing to do, but it's done all the time, I can tell you. And you know, so you know, that survey process is a very intense process to get all the data and identify, you know, currently available options and assess what improvement costs might need to be, what the actual rent is, what the operating expenses are, and all of those things before you really waste time going down the rabbit hole. It's a pretty key thing. So yeah, again, thank you everybody for staying with us. And if there's anything else, just love to open the floor and have an open conversation about anything that we chatted to. We'd be happy to go back to a slide if there was one in particular that someone wanted to look at.
I will say something, you know, we talked about the exit strategy, and I feel like I need to mention that you also should probably think about the entry, you know, in terms of when you purchase something, we always look for the best price, but we make sure that, you know, you're buying it at the right price, right? I have a client that did an acquisition and acquired real estate in that acquisition. And they looked to an appraiser to appraise the property that was coming over. And I'm not sure what happened with that appraisal. But that property was way overvalued, and they have been stuck with it for years because the market does not support what they paid for it, and so they cannot dispose of it without losing money. So just be careful when you're buying buildings that, you know, it is at the right price. That's what, you know, Sean spends a lot of time studying the market and understanding what makes the price right. And so that's one of the uses I think brokers bring to the table, is understanding the market and knowing if something is priced right.
Like Calvin has a question.
So one of my biggest things is funding at the moment. And I was wondering, outside of the SBA, because I don't really have a good relationship with them. I'm trying to acquire just a targeted advance, and I've been, you know, getting ran through the ringer about that. So outside of having to like just basically forward all of my intellectual property or my business plan in full to an investor group, like how else would I be able to find and I don't mean like, you know, the end all be all answer, but just some type of, you know, ideas maybe that I could find full of investors, or, you know, where just there's a marketplace to have people that are willing to, you know, look over.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it's not. I always want to be careful here because this is certainly not our expertise. But you know, there's a variety of ways to get investors involved. There's a couple of recent, you know, developments with programs or apps. I think one is called CrowdStreet, and others where you can actually, you know, post your commercial real estate plan online, and you'll get a lot of micro investors. I honestly don't know that much about it, but I do know that there's been a couple buildings and, you know, in Portland area that have actually been funded and developed or improved through that structure. You know, but there's a lot of hurdles. You know, again, I just don't know enough about it. I think I'd have to do more research to say one way or the other if it's a logical thing to go through. You know, of course, you know, the bank is always a route, but you'll encounter problems there as well. And so I would say that, you know, trying to build a relationship with investors who are interested in your business is probably the, you know, one of the strongest routes. But you know, I think talking to a financial advisor as well can help. And that's something, you know, be happy to make an introduction to a variety of people there as needed. But
Oh, perfect.
there's not a simple answer to that, unfortunately. I'm sorry.
Okay, no problem. I appreciate it. That's why I just wanted to, you know, throw things at the wall and see if something stuff. You know, that was my approach. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah. And anything else from folks here?
Looks like Stephanie
we
contributed
go.
something. Try Craft 3 for funding. I haven't heard of them before.
Thank you. It's not a cider company, is it?
I don't know.
No, it's not a cider company.
Thank you for contributing that. Yeah, it's I mean, I think it's easy to find investors. It's really challenging to find the right investors. That would be the simple explanation of it. and it really just helps to have relationships and someone you trust, kind of giving you recommendations and advice in this area. So
Les looks like he got a lot of money over there. He might be able to help. I'm a Davis too, man. We're family.
I'm here every day.
alrighty.
Are there any
Well,
more questions or?
yeah.
No. Shelley, you have your information in the chat.
Mhm. Oh, I didn't
Okay.
put it here. I'm sorry. I'm the only one who didn't contribute here. Oops. Let me just do that.
So if anyone has any further questions, they can follow up and reach you guys. We definitely thank you all for coming out and doing this presentation for us. Much needed info. I know a lot of businesses and owners are trying to pivot their business and learn new ways to recoup back some of the funds that they may have lost during COVID. If there are any other topics that you guys want to learn more about that is related to commercial real estate, we can definitely invite CRESA to come back and go further in depth on those topics. Oh, here he is. But other than that, we just want to thank you guys for coming, and I hope that you guys got something out of today's presentation to further your business, because we definitely need it. Portland is in desperate need right now as far as growing new business and exploring new options as far as taking the city back to where it used to be. So we want to thank you guys for coming out and learning more about this industry and being a part of this series, as we have been doing series around real estate and owning the various different options of owning real estate. So I just want to thank you guys for coming out. If there are no more questions, please feel free to make sure you have all your contact in the chat so that we all can share information and be able to get you guys a survey out in regards to this presentation.
Thanks so much, Ashley. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank
We
you
really
all.
enjoyed coming out. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Have a good evening.
Thanks, you too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.